Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to introduce you all to owner and founder of Koinonia Counseling Center, licensed professional counselor, ISSTD member, survivor advocate, support and helper, content creator, educator, proud wife and loving mother, documentary and true crime lover, and a woman single-handedly changing how the world sees and understands dissociative identity disorder, Sara Rice, MA, LPC-S. Sara is a compassionate and dedicated professional mental health counselor whose life's work centers on empowering survivors and fostering healing in those facing profound challenges. As a certified supervisor for licensed professional counselors and the proud wife of an Army veteran for over a decade, Sara brings a deep well of empathy and resilience to her practice. A mother of 5, she balances her bustling family life with an unwavering commitment to her clients and her ongoing pursuit of knowledge. Sara earned her master's degree in counseling from Liberty University and is currently working toward a doctorate in traumatology, reflecting her relentless drive to deepen her expertise in trauma and mental health. With a trauma-informed approach, Sara's practice is a sanctuary for survivors, offering hope and guidance to those who have endured unimaginable trauma. Her ability to connect with clients stems from her deep understanding of the complexities of mental health and her genuine care for each individual's journey. Her work is not just a profession, it's a calling to uplift, empower, and restore. I personally met Sara on TikTok, where her account graced my For You page, and I immediately followed and binged all of her content. I was so impressed by her work, the content she was creating around such a difficult topic, and her clear passion for her work and clients that I contacted and reached out to her and asked her to be on this podcast so we could all learn from her. And I was so grateful when she agreed to come on. Her understanding of the complexities of D.I.D, her compassion for the RAMCOA community, and her courage to be speaking publicly about these topics that few in her field will touch make her a hero in my eyes and someone who deserves our support and someone that we can all benefit to learn from. Sara is far more than a counselor. She's a radiant force of hope, a tireless advocate, and a living testament to the transformative power of compassion. Through her work at KCC PLLC, she lights the way for those navigating the deepest shadows of their minds, offering not just solace, but a path to empowerment and renewal. Her dedication to survivors is a clarion call to the resilience of the human spirit, reminding us all that even in the face of profound pain, there is always a way forward. With every client she supports, every story she hears, and every life she touches, Sara weaves a legacy of healing, hope, and unyielding belief in the possibility of brighter days. Her journey inspires us all to embrace our own strength, to seek knowledge relentlessly, and to extend a hand to those in need, proving that one person's compassion can ripple outward to change the world. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you are interested in submitting a written testimony to be featured in a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. I've also started up a new YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to me there at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I'm now streaming new episode premieres from weekly. Turn on your notifications and join our loving community in the live chats every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all on the other side of the screen wholeheartedly for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and even more to every guest on this show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, survivor and anti-child abuse advocate, trauma-informed therapist, voice for the voiceless, survivor helper, supporter, and ally, and a courageous pursuer of truth, risking it all to break the stigmas around D.I.D. and ritual abuse. The one, the only, Sara Rice. Sara, it is an honor to have you on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Almost wanted to make me cry because I like to try to, the light is for them. But so thank you. That was very, very meaningful.
And through you, it is for them. There's so many that can't speak out, and there's so many that unfortunately, didn't make it through the things that you advocate for and talk about. And so you get to be that light for all of them, and it's really an honor to have you on to be able to do that, and I just can't thank you enough for your work. There's so few, therapists that historically have wanted to venture down the path that you did and take on this type of client and to learn more about these things that they're not taught in school. And I'm just so impressed with your passion, all the work that you've done. And now you're publicly, educating the rest of us on what you're learning, which is just amazing. So I'm really, really just thankful for you and your work.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And so let's talk about you a little bit. I want to introduce you to my audience because I've gotten to talk to you a little bit personally. I've followed your social media, and I know a little bit about your journey, but I think it would be really interesting just to talk about your journey getting into the field that you're in,
Yeah.
and even how you came across this type of client base and what made you passionate enough to continue going down that path with them to help them heal and to learn about what they've gone through.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So I was originally going to be an art historian. So I was nowhere near the psychology realm. I was like, ugh, I don't want to ever do anything with psychology. It seems so boring. And it wasn't until being a military spouse that I realized, like, oh, I really want to help. You think, I really want to help those who've been through the same experiences that I've gone through. And so I said, I think I'm going to get into counseling and psychology. So did a major change, and, things just kind of really evolved from there, from going to, every time I'd say, oh, I'm not going to work with this population, it would end up turning around and saying, like, yeah, you are from substance use disorders, and getting into working with those with dissociative disorders, which was really kind of by accident, just of, my colleague whom I work with originally was getting into dissociative disorders and said, well, I'm full. Why don't you take on some of these clients? And I'm like, okay. And just started slowly from there. And I have an insatiable appetite for information and learning and growing. And I just started to fall in love with this community, and then really started to hear about, survivors of RAMCOA in connection to D.I.D, and had clients coming in with stories. And I'm like, okay, being is that I love information and I need to empower people and I need to empower myself. I just continued to learn and grow about this community and how significant the injustices are in this community. It's not only with just dissociative disorders in general, which have such a stigma, but then with those RAMCOA survivors and working with them and seeing how, at every turn, there seems to be just another injustice that they happen to befall to no fault of their own. And I'm kind of the person that's like, enough is enough, and really set my family up to understand that I'm working with this population, working with D.I.D and, organically in RAMCOA, and said that come what may, I want to work with this population and I want to educate. And that's why I got into school and continuing on education, is because I also want to educate and say, like, this can be done. It is intense work, but it is valuable work and work that needs to be done. I can't even say enough how much the work needs to be done.
100%. And I'm just like, makes my heart melt hearing that you were so inspired and you weren't just turned off by it or pushed away. It's really hard to face that this stuff exists in our world. And I've heard so many times from survivors that have been on my podcast that when they finally felt safe enough to tell a therapist about what they were going through, or they thought they knew what their diagnosis was and wanted support from their therapist and were trying to get their validation and compassion, the therapist would say that they're too traumatized from the survivor's story to work with them. And they would almost, just fire the survivor as a client and just turn their back on them. And I just think, gosh, you know, I know this stuff is really hard, but it's also, it's a big part of our population. And it's things that a psychologist, a therapist, a counselor, this should be baseline for their knowledge of trauma, you know. And I wanted to ask you, you know, you've had a lot of education, and a lot of what you've learned with this community, I'm sure, has been self-education. Wanted to see, what do they actually cover in college courses or academia regarding extreme trauma, dissociation? Oh man.
Zero. And the only time I can even remember anything with dissociative identity disorder is being in my diagnoses class, and you know, kind of, it was an on my own type thing. You know, they focused on like bipolar and maybe a little bit of schizophrenia and maybe a little bit of PTSD, but that's really as far as it went. And then stepping even further into, you know, the trauma cognitive area, you focus maybe on some of those, you know, little t traumas, though all trauma is significant, absolutely, 110%. But it's almost kind of like a focus on, is it a quick trauma to treat type situation, which, you know, we get into empirical studies and that type of stuff, and how can we get things treated faster and faster. And I think it's also another reason why some clinicians, first and foremost, don't know what to even their next step to take, but having that idea of like, this is not something that I'm going to treat quickly, can be a little intimidating as well. So yeah, zero, unfortunately.
Oh my goodness. And so what was your first occurrence getting the education or finding out about D.I.D or ritual abuse? Where did you come across that terminology?
Yeah, so it was really survivors coming to me in my room. You know, once I got into the field, into the specialty of working with dissociative identities, that population started to come in. And I'd like to think that pretty similar to like what we talked about, you know, it's like, no, there's no topic off, you know, that's off the table. In the therapy room, it's, you know, you're here, there's no shame, there's no judgment. You want to share, you don't want to share, whatever you need. And then so people just felt, you know, comfortable with sharing some of the experiences that led up to having dissociative identities. And so I realized that I needed to seek out this information in order to be able to help this community and understand, you know, really that there's so many different nuances in working with dissociative disorders, from an organic, what we call like an organic D.I.D to maybe a RAMCOA D.I.D. And so I really had to kind of seek out books, any, you know, thankful, you know, with podcasts, any podcasts that can be helpful in sharing information and just learning about these organizations and where can I get involved and how can I learn more and how can I like grow in this field to be able to help and be ready for the information coming in.
Good for you. I can't imagine, you know, even just from your own perspective, not having the vernacular in therapy to be like, okay, I literally paid a ton of money to go to school for this, and I don't have a word for what my client is going through. I have to go figure it out by myself, you know, and actually taking that journey and doing that. I mean, kudos to you. And so you mentioned a couple other disorders that people can have, something like schizophrenia, bipolar. Those things constantly also come up on my podcast from survivors, that a lot of times before D.I.D enters the conversation with a therapist who's trauma informed like you, which a lot of people have trouble finding initially, their first diagnoses are often things like psychosis, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia. And so I thought maybe if you could maybe explain a little bit of differences between some of these for people who, you know, might be unfamiliar with dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah. So when we talk about really when you're in the therapy room with somebody, what I absolutely encourage first and foremost is sit with them without any of your own biases coming in. Notice the continuity of what your client shares with you. But like when you look at a bipolar, you're looking at mood fluctuation. So you're looking at, do we have somebody who's in a low depression? Do we have somebody that spikes really high and suddenly is on top of the world, can do anything and everything? We talk about a schizophrenia, you're going to look at voices. Are they internal? Are they external? Auditory, visual hallucinations. Both when you talk about bipolar and schizophrenia can have the psychosis. And I think a lot of people think that when people are in a psychosis, that can also be seen as like when somebody who has D.I.D can be like rapid switching, because everything seems to be a little bit more chaotic. There's not a continuity to what is said. But really, when you take kind of those disorders and you look at a dissociative identity disorder, there is such a continuity of what you're being told. And that's being told from like, what does my internal world look like? What do my parts look like? What is the, the auditory information? Where is it coming from? It's coming from internal. That is also very consistent. And understanding that even these separate disorders that you have that are often the bipolar, the schizophrenia, the borderline personality disorders, and not just to further scare clinicians, but understanding like they can come along with D.I.D, but you have to be able to kind of parse out what you're looking at with your client. And that comes from being attuned to your client and really listening, like what is actually going on, and just formulating like, oh, when you get in that room with somebody who either has a schizophrenia, like there's consistencies you're going to hear. Bipolar, there's consistencies. Same with a borderline, you're going to hear consistencies. And those with dissociative disorder, organic or RAMCOA, there's consistencies that come along with these disorders. So when we look at like switching, that is often seen as, oh, somebody's in a mania or somebody's in a depressive low. We get parts that maybe are representative of carrying some of those heavy loads, the sadness, some of the fear or the grief. Those that don't understand D.I.D would say, oh, well, they're manic or they're in a depressive episode. Or when you're having like a borderline where you have such intense emotions, might be mistaken for, oh, when we're switching and we have a part that has, such attachment to, never being heard, never being understood, never, really getting a chance to speak, you're going to have a part that maybe does things that are a little bit more indicative of a high emotional expression. So I just, for clinicians and even for those who kind of are in that limbo of not knowing, just take a moment and breathe and really kind of as best as you can take stock of what are you experiencing and what are your clients experiencing, so as not to overwhelm yourself or your client who's coming into the room. So I hope that there's so much we can almost do like a whole like on one, in comparison. But those are kind of like the three main ones that people get like, oh, you have these, not dissociative identity disorder.
And so what are some of the consistencies that you've seen in clients that are RAMCOA / D.I.D, since often they do go together?
Yeah. So you will see a versus like when we get anything with a psychosis, you get a continuity in the stories that they tell. Even if you don't know that maybe they've switched, interestingly enough, the stories that they share from the experiences, from the connections of, say, if family members were involved, you get a continuity in what they're expressing to you has happened. And really, there's nothing, although it seems fantastical, there's nothing when you really sit down and think about it that is like, oh, okay, you're not talking about, there being, unicorns coming down in a spaceship. And you're talking about, these are consistent things that family members have done or that you have been subjected to that are like, yeah, that's as intense as it is, there is still realism attached to it. So you'll get also consistencies in parts from those who have gone through RAMCOA, whereas maybe they don't have names, they don't have the same internal, say those with internal have like internal worlds, so you won't see those necessarily with RAMCOA. And that is all indicative of how their D.I.D has come about in a very systematic, torturous way. And so when you see from client to client who has gone through RAMCOA, you begin to see those consistencies with clients. And that's really, really important to be able to sit down and say, oh, okay, I as fantastical as it seems, this is real. And I always say, when we talk about RAMCOA, that time, and I've mentioned this to you, that time at night when everything is quiet and all seems still and all seems calm, that is where things are happening and we just don't know. So that is hopefully a way that clinicians can work and then validate clients as well and their experiences.
What percentage of clients with, say, D.I.D RAMCOA versus bipolar schizophrenia, in your experience, have missing time as a part of their system experience?
Absolutely. When we talk about that being another consistent, the missing of time, percentage, those that I work with who have schizophrenia or who have maybe a bipolar diagnosis, that actually we see like that fits their situation. We don't see that time loss necessarily. We may see things being choppy sometimes because, you are in heightened states. But in comparison to those who have dissociative identities, that's really, really key in terms of being a component that you're going to see is that missing time. And it can come in quite often as subtle as talking with a spouse and they're like, we had this event situation that was going on and I don't ever remember even having that conversation and talking about it. And then you see that consistently. It doesn't have to be as intense as Hollywood would like it to be, where it's like, where am I? I have lost time. It's those things that's really, especially if you're in relationships, start to kind of wither away at things, is that time loss component. Absolutely. So I would say nearly 0% I see with time loss in those clients that don't have dissociative identities. And with dissociative dissociative identities, I'd say 100%. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm not as familiar with things like schizophrenia and bipolar, but I know from talking to so many survivors, that's been my experience too, is on some level missing time seems to be 100% affiliated with dissociative identity disorder, whether that's years, whether that's a year, whether that's moments of their life, and so I think that's really fascinating that these other disorders that commonly get diagnosed instead of D.I.D don't have a missing time component, yet it doesn't seem to be part of the conversation with, a lot of therapists and in their consideration of diagnoses.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you could have a bipolar and a schizophrenia, and lots of times those can be prone to, coping mechanisms that could lead to blackouts, but you're not seeing the consistent time loss that you're going to see with a dissociative identity client.
Really fascinating. And so I want to get more into D.I.D, but before we do, there's a word that we've brought up a bunch of times that I'm sure there's some people in the audience that are like, what does that mean? And that's RAMCOA, which is an acronym for a few different things that we're talking about and we'll be talking about today. And wanted to see if you could maybe break down what that word means and stands for people who are newer to it.
Yeah. So RAMCOA, not an official term. It's a term that we kind of use in our world and even in the outer world for ritual abuse, mind control, and organized abuse. So unfortunately, there even has to be this acronym to represent this form of trauma. And a lot of what people don't understand is kind of that organizational component that is wrapped in with RAMCOA. Versus what you see, we talk about an organic D.I.D, lots of times that's coming from the family itself, which is just as traumatizing and detrimental, but lots of times, more often than not, you're going to see organization involved in whether it be the ritual abuse, whether it be mind control, or, of course, the organized abuse. So that is what when we say RAMCOA, that is what we're encompassing. And I want people to understand that it's organizational. It's a wraparound situation that's happening.
Could you dive into that just a little bit more? What is the difference between something like ritual abuse versus, say, a domestic abuse case where you hear a child may have been severely beaten once in their life, or had an instance at home that was abusive, versus a ritual abuse client?
Yeah. So, and again, and you and I kind of say this all the time, even when we're talking just between the two of us, that any abuse is significant.
Horrible.
And it needs attention. It needs to have light shed upon it. But what you're seeing, when you have a domestic violence situation, of course, we could have somebody who comes out of that relationship, being the child, having that parental relationship that does form D.I.D. But when we talk about something like an organized, whether it be ritual abuse, and we talk about things that involve rituals generally being projected upon a child is what is happening. A domestic violence, you're more or less, yes, you could absolutely have the abuse perpetrated onto the child, but you generally will have spaces of kind of calm. When we talk about like a ritual abuse, it's almost like a constant, waves crashing against the rocks type of situation. And so you're essentially everything that we learn, and both of those that are in those situations, we're talking about being children, they learn, of course, fight or flight. But you really start to kind of, as you're growing and learning, when we talk about the organized abuse, you're then becoming the person that somebody else needs you to be. Whereas in organic D.I.D, you're becoming the person, so to speak, that you need to be in order to protect the self. So while they're both significant, when you have the two differences, you're seeing one where you can kind of turn inwards, and that D.I.D forms to protect the child, whereas then the organized abuse, it is formed so the child essentially does whatever thing that the organization needs to be. And the organization can include family, but you have a difference in, there might be more breadth in an organic D.I.D. to form parts that are needed to protect the child, where parts are formed to be a tool for the organization. So while they're absolutely both significant, you're really kind of looking at a different trajectory of what those parts are there for. Are they there more inwards for the child than to be able to protect itself outwardly, or are they more kind of pulled outer and to be a tool for the organization?
That's a great way to explain it. So essentially, ritualistic abuse or organized abuse is kind of a means to an end for the purpose of creating dissociation on purpose.
Yep.
To be utilized for whatever the agenda or whatever the means of the cult or the family is that is perpetuating the abuse, where more of a domestic abuse situation would be from somebody actually perpetrating because that's what they want to do, and an organic side effect of that perpetration one time or once in a while would be the child having to survive and creating D.I.D. themselves within, and having parts that weren't made deliberately by the abuser, but as a side effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Both significant,
Yes.
but definitely pertinent to understand that there's a differing means for the system that is created.
Yes. And from my own experience talking to survivors, it seems that kind of the difference in perpetrators too. And I'd love to hear your feedback on this. One is, for example, a domestic abuse situation where a child might have ongoing or one-time abuse, but it's more randomized. Seems to be that is an actual, a lot of times, pedophile or perpetrator that genuinely gets off on abusing the child, where a lot of times in these families, it seems like the ritual abuse aspect of it doesn't necessarily mean the person perpetuating it is a pedophile. It's somebody who is conditioning and training the child in their parts for these purposes, to have these different skills to use for the cult system that they belong to. It's not necessarily a perpetration of enjoyment of the perpetrator. It's more of a system that they're doing, how you explained with the organized abuse, as a means to an end to have a result internally that they're creating within the child, the mind control component.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very significant to understand that even though there's family involved and they are often perpetrators, it's not always as willing participants either.
Yes.
And so everybody, one of the amazing things that I did hear and learn and is like, everybody from the bottom on up is a tool. And that's all there are. You may have perverse acts, of course. You may have just terrible, terrible things that happen, but it's all as a means to an end. It's not in any form to have a gratification, but how can we meet the overarching needs of the group? And that, each person has kind of their role and their tool and their spot in the organization in order to further just aid in the delights of the organization and what they need or want, rather.
Yes. And I think that's a really important differentiation, because we've, as a society, and I'm sure in the therapeutic community too, you sort of learn about maybe psychopaths or narcissists and people who purposely abuse because they get enjoyment out of it. And of course, those types of people do exist in these stories that you and I hear about. However, a lot of times, even the survivors that disclose that they've been abused, part of their disclosures are that they were forced to be a perpetrator themselves a lot of times, and that you hear that they believe a lot of their family members didn't want to, and they have a lot of compassion for their families and wish their families would come be free with them, which sadly isn't the case a lot of times. But I think we really need to separate those two types of perpetrations and perpetrators Because like you said, there's a big percentage of people in the ritual abuse community aspect that are not willing, where a lot of times in a lot of the other abuses that we are more familiar with, we hear more about the willing participants, the ones who genuinely do abuse because of it, it fulfills them, because it's something that they enjoy. It's not something that they're just unwillingly doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that takes on it'll be an interesting role in the therapy room to speak with those parts in regards to, when you look at kind of both lines of D.I.D, organic or RAMCOA, kind of taking that into consideration and working with parts too, because of the unwillingness of the whole program.
Yes, 100%. And so I want to dive a little bit more into D.I.D, since we've been skirting around it and talking a little bit about it. And maybe we could start by just explaining the process of dissociation. What is that? And, when does it happen and how does it happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So dissociation in itself is a coping mechanism. Many people on a day-to-day basis will dissociate for a while. It's not, there's zoning out and there's dissociation. Dissociation just happens to be a more detached form of zoning out. So, not uncommon for people to experience. When you get into it affecting and becoming disordered, so to speak, is when it really begins to affect the daily life. And that's where you will see dissociation and time loss, where somebody may dissociate for hours, meaning they're disconnected from reality and the outside world. They could be, internally, running through a field in their head. Maybe they're in a completely different place. We get to, of course, dissociative identities, and quite often there's another part that is present. So when we talk about D.I.D and the formalization of D.I.D, we think of an individual, an infant growing up. They are often they need to have their needs met, from being fed to being clothed to being cleaned. Those are all kind of separate components that they have. It's not something that's all combined together. Each one comes when it's needed and necessary. And then it's almost kind of like in the infant's mind, it's forgotten about. The likelihood, and we can't speak to absolutes, is they're not thinking after they get fed, ooh, I can't wait to have dinner at, 5 p.m. It's a separate thing that happens. And that continues on. And of course, children are, we talk about them in terms of, and for lack of better terminology, they seem to be more selfish, meaning they're more internal ego based, and that is a survival mechanism. So when we have it where needs are not being met, those parts that say, I need fed, I need clothed, I need love, I need attunement, I need these things, never have the opportunity to kind of form together to make the whole person. They always stay with a little bit of separation. And that is where you see the dissociation or the barriers that come up between these parts. And lots of times parts represent the needs that were not met. And so as a child grows, and generally we see this happens before 8, we will then see a person continue on and having those components of themselves, their needs, being separated by dissociation. So it is the mind's actual way of saying, this situation is too difficult to deal with. I need to have this dissociative barrier between all of my needs in order to function throughout daily life. When we talk about RAMCOA, the dissociation is created on purpose, and the self is split or stays split, so to speak, on purpose, from purposefully not fulfilling the needs of the person, and If anybody ever does want to kind of garner more information, there's fantastic books that kind of breaks that down with a trigger warning. I will absolutely say that. But they keep the needs from being met. They have mechanisms or tools that they will utilize to keep a person separate. So that way they can use whatever part they need to fulfill whatever need they need to have fulfilled. Is that going out and stealing something? Is that, are you talking about sex trafficking? Are we talking about like whatever it is? They will make sure that those parts stay separate. And it doesn't get to be so much that mechanism for protection. It's now a tool for whatever, again, we talked about the organization needing. So each starts with an infant needs to be met, and then they continue not to be met. We have dissociative barriers, but on each side we have different reasons for them being, whether it's, hey, we need to be attuned to our caregivers and love them and believe that they're okay, or hey, this part needs to do this particular thing for the organization. So that's kind of in a nutshell, so to speak, when we talk about dissociation and dissociative identities.
In children that don't go through this systematized ritualistic type of abuse that you're talking about, where dissociative identities are deliberately created, children may not dissociate if they have an unmet need that maybe isn't super traumatic to them. They might still develop an entire whole personality without the splitting. And I wanted to ask, in regards to the two, what's the difference in how those memories are stored? Why does one child compartmentalize the memory, and how does that work with the brain versus a child who doesn't dissociate and has the capacity to carry the memory throughout their life?
Yeah. So we talk about complex trauma in general, which is kind of the umbrella that when we talk about like D.I.D, either organically or RAMCOA falling under, memory in itself is very difficult to really come by. It's quite often you'll hear like, oh, I just don't remember much about my childhood. I don't remember anything good. I don't remember anything bad. I just don't have these memories. So that's quite prevalent in complex trauma as it is. And that's just because of the brain structure and how information is brought in and compartmentalized, so to speak. Now, when you get dissociation, and we're looking at this from, it really is learning organic, and we're learning RAMCOA. When you talk about with an organic, parts are going to hold different memories. So while one person may say, I just don't remember such and such thing, you may have another part that says, yeah, I remember X, Y, and Z. And each, so parts will hold memories with that overarching umbrella of course, memories in complex trauma, are never great to be had because of the trauma. When you have a RAMCOA, quite often parts are created to hold information, less of like memories, but more of an information. There's parts that are specifically created like file keepers to keep information. And that's not necessarily memories of something, but it would be like, oh, this is my role in this particular, say, ritual, or this is my role on a day-to-day basis when so-and-so, comes to the home and I have to do these particular things. It's file keeping for the idea of I need to be purposeful, rather than memories being able to come in and say, yeah, I remember when I was 5 and, such and such happened to me. And you will definitely get a record of things that are very kind of like systematic, that are attached to like systematic events, versus kind of like those fluid memories of like, yeah, when I was 6 and such happened. And it's memories for purposeful use.
That's a great explanation of that. And I think that that's a really great way to break it down for people who that concept might be confusing for. And it's really, it's a shame that this stuff isn't taught to clinicians, therapists, counselors, because it seems like just such a baseline, if little infants can go through this, and oftentimes that's the demographic, infants and small children are the targets for this type of abuse and for these symptoms and side effects of it to happen. It's like just a foundation of the person in general, and yet it just gets so neglected, and so it's amazing that you're able to shine a light on it in the way that you are. And I wish more therapists, I wish more schools and academia was more open to talking about this topic, because I'm just like, how do so many therapists function? Because they have to have clients coming in that have this, and how sad that so many of them are getting misdiagnosed.
Yeah, I did a training yesterday, and the particular doctor had mentioned, if you treat complex trauma, you have seen dissociation, you have seen D.I.D. And I'm going to take that a step further. If you have seen complex trauma, you are seeing D.I.D., you are seeing RAMCOA. You are absolutely seeing it. These are things that are coming into your office. Even if you're maybe just treating a depression, you are absolutely seeing this. And unfortunately, so we know, like with dissociative identity disorder, it could range from 2 to 3% of the world's population that has this disorder. They can do pretty good with saying 1 to 1.5% of the world's population. And that's right up there with schizophrenia and bipolar. And unfortunately, we can't say what that percentage is for RAMCOA, because it does operate in the shadows. And survivors are not believed and taken seriously. So we can accurately say, like, yeah, this is 1.5 to 2% with D.I.D. being the thing. And we can't say, like, and then 3% of that, or then 1% of that, or 0.5% is RAMCOA, which is, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Would you be able to explain a little bit, just in your own words, or you could use experiences of what you've seen with your work, when we talk about organized or ritualistic abuse and it being systematized in a child's life, and then obviously a lot of times into teenage years and adulthood, it continues. What could that look like, or what types of parts are being created, and for what purposes would families or people want to use a different part of a child instead of just keeping them whole?
Yeah. So it's kind of almost as simple as, like, well, why would you have 5 people to do 5 different jobs if you could have one person do 5 different jobs? First and foremost, I mean, when you think about how they look upon it as, we can utilize this one person to do whatever we want them to do, and we can get them to stay quiet, and we can manipulate them to believe these things that will aid in them staying quiet. It really is sometimes as simple as that, as we can get this one person to do all of this. And especially when you use children, children in crimes, or children in that type of stuff, nobody's going to think twice about a child doing certain things. And in order to be able to keep that child quiet, they can utilize those parts internally to even further keep that child in check. And we talk about that being like reporters. They have a reporter part who the child may not intentionally, like, they go and they have to perpetrate a crime, and maybe they decide not to do it. Maybe it's something that they could hide. Well, they can't hide it, because another part of them is going to come forward, because it was created to come forward to share. Yeah, I didn't perpetrate that crime. I did X, Y, and Z. And, like, you can't keep things secret. And parts that will even be formed to aid in the system understanding, or that person understanding, like, we're watching you. Like, we're always around. You're never going to get away from us. They can create those parts So they don't even have to say routinely, I'm always watching you. You might have like a perpetrator in an organic situation, like we talk about with pedophiles, with grooming and that type of stuff, but they're always the ones that are constantly reminding. They're constantly having to remind, don't tell your parents, don't do this. If you do this, this will happen. Organized, they have the whole system to do it for them. And that is like one of the number one benefits of utilizing the dissociation tool. Is why would we have somebody, 5 people to do 5 different jobs? We can have one, and we can keep them quiet, and we can manipulate them. It's a disgusting advantage that they have, which is more than unfortunate.
And so with what you're saying, this also makes it really difficult for, say, teachers or other people, safe people around children who might, be around them often and be able to potentially see symptoms. They may see them more in, say, a domestic violence case, or with a child that does not have DID, that might be aware or able to talk, or might have bruises because they don't have somebody, constantly trying to mask them up and make them look perfect. But the child has an ability to recall and therefore could potentially tell. Where you're saying the child that has DID, their memory is compartmentalized. So they have a part that can go to school and is unaware of being abused, doesn't show any symptoms, doesn't have the ability to recall the memories even of the abuse even happening to disclose. And so it's like an undetected, it's like a perfect crime in a way, because the child isn't even aware of what it's going through to be able to even disclose if it wanted to.
Yeah. And while you're going to see with the organic DID, those parts absolutely being there to protect, because they don't ever want to, the number one thing is we don't want to think negatively or have bad thoughts about our caregivers, because we need them to be our protectors. We need them to be. We are ingrained. It's ingrained in us as humans to be connected to your caregivers, to be connected to who it is that, brought you into this world. But you do see a little bit more of kind of, it is messy, where you're going to see those bruises, and you're going to see things that could be on the outside to give teachers or other people an idea that something could be going on. When you see in an organized, in the RAMCOA situation, they're not going to leave bruises. They're not going to leave bruises. They know what to do. They're absolutely going to have the part come forward that handles day-to-day life, that doesn't remember everything else. And they're very particular about what others would see on the outside. So it's definitely twofold in terms of the part being forward and the memories not being there to pull from, and the organization knowing you don't leave bruises. You don't do things that could be seen on the outside, but they have other methods and means by which to get what they need out of the situation.
And so in your experience, do you think children that don't go through a dissociative type of situation where that's an end result, that they maybe know about their abuse, even if they don't know how to articulate, do you think that child is going to show, say, more symptoms of, acting out, things like that, and be, I don't want to say like a low performer, but struggle to keep their composure more than somebody who may have a RAMCOA dissociation? Do you think those children have the propensity to be a higher performer, given that they don't remember?
Yeah, you will absolutely see, because the body remembers everything. First and foremost, before anything, when we talk about trauma, is not only psychological, it's physiological. The body's going to remember, pardon me. And so you're going to see more of an outward display, even if there's not like, and you see this in trauma in all children. You might not know why they're acting out or having this particular behavior, but it's connected to something traumatic. Whereas in a RAMCOA situation, you would be hard pressed to see anything but what needs to be seen. Child going to school, maybe talking, maybe they even have friends. They probably don't have sleepovers, but they may have friends at school. They may get good grades. You're not going to see these behaviors come out. And generally, when we do, if we see behaviors come out, even in RAMCOA or organic D.I.D, you're older, something has triggered, something has happened. And it's kind of like, oh, the floodgates are open type of situation.
Which is very, very disturbing to think about, because I'm sure that there are a lot of caring, compassionate people out there that are constantly scouring their classes or churches, to see if there's children giving any type of signal or red flag that there's something going on at home, and even I think about how many kids did I know growing up that I went to school with, played with, that lived in my neighborhoods, that were going through something like this. And because of this mechanism and the repressed memory aspect of it, that I had no idea. And so it makes it really hard for us to come together as a community and help the children that are currently going through it, because there is not indicators that are strong enough to maybe send off that signal that, oh, this kid's for sure getting abused.
Yeah. And that is why it is so pertinent to listen to survivors. Just listen to them. Just give them that respect first, even if you have to work backwards from there to be like, but this seems so implausible. Like, listen to them. How can you make it plausible? Like, what do you need to do? What are the steps in your mind, especially if they're coming into your office as a clinician? What do you need to do to make it plausible to you? And for me, it was really just continuing to hear and sit with people, and really say like, oh no, they're serious. This stuff really did happen. This is not fantastical. This is something that needs to be believed. So we need, first and foremost, to start by really believing survivors when they tell you about these groups and these things that are going on. So hopefully, when we talk about even prosecution, which seems to be such a far out idea, but maybe if we believed them more, we'd have a greater chance of those organizations kind of being dismantled. Listening to them is key, first and foremost. You need to believe survivors.
And so with this, like, we understand now that children, young adults, teenagers can function very normally when in social situations because of dissociative identity disorder and this mechanism that they need to survive their day-to-day life. And I wanted to ask, on the other end, witting or unwitting, I think we have a very skewed perception of what a perpetrator looks like. We, I think, assume that they're like the movies where they're very underperforming, they're drug addicted. And of course, we have some like that. But I wanted to see and ask you, in your experience, what types of professions or what types of work do some of these or all of these perpetrators have that you hear about from your clients? Because a lot of times these aren't the scum, that we just assume that they are. These are people just like the kids that we go to school with. They're people that we see every day.
Yeah. You're going to see varied careers. You're going to, of course, I know it seems very cliche. You're going to see a lot of powerful people, people that are like, it's not that you wouldn't think that they could be up to something nefarious. It's that their money kind of blinds you to that, where it's like, I think they're doing something wrong. And it's, the money waved in front. From teachers to police officers to people who you would think should be protecting children to people who seemingly have done some good, amazing things for the community. As those are the perpetrators. It's not people like, again, they don't want to be seen as, anybody who would be such an obvious mark would not be what they'd even want to have around. It's, oh, we're this good organization. We do good for everybody. We, or I'm, I have this profession and it's helping. And I mean, we saw this from just not too long ago with the Catholic priest and that coming out. Like, you think for a second that it's not kind of like your everyday average, oh, they're a really good person type of people. You probably have another thing coming. I think we're beginning to learn that.
Which is really shocking because we're really trained in society to sort of revere and put on a pedestal and obviously pay more, whether it's our attention or money, to these certain people that have these different careers. And really the last thing that you'd think was somebody that devoted that much time to do whatever they're doing with life could have some type of a, disorder on their end, whether it's an actual psychopathy where they are conscious of what they're doing behind the scenes and aware of it, or if they've been somebody that's been horrifically abused and pushed in these pathways and is showing up every day, making money, performing, being a CEO or being a police chief or whatever it is, somebody in the military. It's not the person that we tend to have in our mind's eye that could be a perpetrator, somebody that is involved in any type of way with an organized crime group.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't wear buttons or badges that say what they're doing. And that's the truth of it.
And so besides at home, what other locations have you heard that this type of abuse with a group of people is taking place?
Yes, not only with your home, but you're going to see it at churches. You're going to see, depending on schools, is a possibility. Any type of place that could seemingly be an innocent front. For instance, could be a diner and maybe, there's another room or another place that a child could be brought to. But definitely some have had it in just neighbors' houses, separate from their own house. Any place, again, that seems like it wouldn't hold anything nefarious, chances are there's nefarious stuff happening.
Has this all been really shocking for you to hear about when you hear that these people in these, high level, powerful positions are doing this behind the scenes, or that it's happening in common areas that are right in our community? How did that affect you to learn how close to home it was?
Shocked beyond words. I think that this is the demeanor. Just really being stunned, not wholeheartedly surprised, but stunned that it is in fact as close. And to anybody really out there, it's there and everywhere. It's not, oh, it happens in Chicago, oh, it happens in New York, and it happens where you least expect it to happen. That's the point. The point is to make you believe nothing's happening, it's fine, there's no man behind the curtain. There's no man behind the curtain.
That was difficult for me too, because I sort of grew up with this notion when I'd hear human trafficking. I was like, oh, that just happens in like third world countries, which is horrible. But gosh, I'm so grateful that it doesn't happen where I live. Like, I'm so blessed, and I wish I could do more. Like, I wish there was something that I could do to help. I feel so disconnected from it. But you really do kind of separate yourself. Like, well, this doesn't happen here. It's happening way over there or way over there. And thank goodness it doesn't happen where I live. And when you hear about, and it makes sense, like if you're doing crime you're not going to just put it out in the open. You're going to find ways to disguise it. You see it with drug trafficking and, you know, mafias that we've learned about historically that have been involved with things like organized, you know, crimes and drugs. And you see all the different ways that they massage themselves into society, and nobody knows that it exists until something happens and there's, you know, some type of blunder and somebody gets caught or somebody rats somebody out, whatever it is, you know. But it's always really shocking to learn that. And when I had learned from listening to survivors all the different places that it was taking place, and that it was in these like amazing cities, you know, Los Angeles and, you know, Sandusky, Ohio, and Austin, Texas, and just all these different places that just seem like so close to you, and all over, you know, in the state that I live, in the state that you live. It's just like, holy crap, like this is everywhere. And somehow like none of us know about it. Somehow we just all go on with our lives and we are completely unaware of it. We're passing these people all the time, or giving them our business, or going to school with them, or letting our kids play with their, you know, at their homes or with their families. And we're, you know, sending them to churches where these people are. They're being taught in classes that maybe the teachers are participating in it. We're calling the police when they might be involved with it. And it just really like shakes your world up. You know, it's really, really, that's been one of the most difficult parts, I think, as an outsider, of somebody that didn't grow up in this, to just like realize how unstable and how unsafe the world is. You know, when you have, like you said, this perfect idea of like, nothing bad's happening here. This is great. You know, we're so lucky. And of course we're lucky if we didn't grow up that way, but it really is everywhere. Like, we're not, just because it didn't happen to us doesn't mean it wasn't right next to us somehow.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why, again, first and foremost, if they come into your office and they, even a part happens to come out and just share, like, just pause and listen. Please just pause and listen. I know it's overwhelming because the world can seem very dark, but just take a minute and listen, and then go from there. If all you can do first and foremost is listen, and then aid and resources, do that, please. Please, first and foremost, just listen.
On your end, knowing that this has shaken up your world, you know, it shakes up everybody's world, it changes your life to learn about this. What have you done to take care of yourself? I know a lot of therapists don't even get into it because they're afraid of how it's going to affect them. They take on the trauma too. And I'm sure you've taken on so much trauma, you know, listening to these stories and doing all the research that you've done. How do you take care of yourself? And what advice could you give to other therapists or helpers who are struggling with that and maybe pushing this work away because of how it impacts them?
Yeah. I, first and foremost, am very honest with my significant other. I don't go into full detail, of course, but I do let them know, hey, I am doing work that is very deep and very heavy. So they understand that if I'm having days where I may be a little bit more distant because maybe I am just processing, you know, things that are going on, they understand. They also understand it from a safety standpoint, that this work could be a little dangerous. To say that it's not, I think, would be a disservice. So I'm very clear with my significant other about that. And so that's what I recommend is, who is your support network? That you can say, hey, I do this really deep, heavy work. Some days I might be like really in processing mode. Safety wise, hey, I do this really heavy work. I just kind of want to keep you abreast of the situation and keep open and honest with your support networks. Because, you know, any therapist is going to have that time they need to take to kind of process what they've gone through, you know, at any level that you work with clients. But the more that you kind of lean on your supports, the more that you're going to kind of feel you can take a breath and breathe despite it being so heavy. And just going so far as, you know, without going into details. Yeah, I had a really heavy session. And then my significant other's like, got it. Okay. Might get a little extra shoulder rub, might be like, hey, I got dinner. We're good. So lean on your supports. You don't have to share everything, but just so they know, like, that you are doing significant heavy work, but significant work is the key.
And how do you balance kind of that stress? I know the work that you do, it can be very intense. It's not like you can just cancel on people if you're having a bad day. Like you have to have a good day every day to show up for your clients. How do you take care of that heaviness? Do you see a therapist, or are there ways that emotionally you're able to decompress all the heaviness that you get?
Yeah. So I did do therapy. I always recommend any therapist do therapy. I've had a couple therapists myself. Now is, I really do a lot of like my advocacy work. I'm also a mover. I have ADHD. So moving for me is kind of like my own therapy now, is moving from task to task and doing things. But being able to do the content that I do on social media, like really kind of helps. Like I feel like if I don't say anything, I'm going to have like a bubble just burst. Whereas if I'm like, hey, yeah, let me work through this particular topic, get it out there, share it, and then I can usually like move on from there. So, others might not be doing social media, but maybe there's another outlet that they have aside from therapy. Maybe there's journaling or art, anything expressive. Music therapy is great, just to get kind of that physiological, aspect of trauma out.
That's so good. I actually related to that so much. I was like, oh my gosh, that's literally what I did. I didn't really necessarily realize that was why I did it. But I started my podcast because I felt that way. I was like, I'm going to explode if I don't do something with this information. Like, how do I just hold this all inside and know that it's happening and just like go to work and be quiet and like forget about it? It's like you have to like get it out of your body, just like your clients do,
Yep. They need
so
to be
that's
heard.
awesome. Yes. Otherwise, it just like festers there. And so going back to sort of the topics that we were discussing, you had mentioned, obviously, you see clients at the point where they remember, and you had mentioned there can be a triggering, or there's a time in somebody's life more on the adult side where what they went through as a child starts to bleed through, and they start to become conscious of it instead of it being locked away and compartmentalized, and they're just able to function without knowledge of it. Can you explain a little bit about how that breakthrough happens, or why it happens, and what can cause that triggering or that remembering suddenly for somebody?
Yeah. So you have kind of a covert DID, and you have an overt DID. Like I have clients who kind of have both, where maybe they've always just kind of been a quirky child. You see more in the covert DID where, okay, they're going along life. Things seem to be going well, seemingly going well. Maybe they get married. Then they have a life event. So that could be like having a child, especially physiologically for female born who have children. Just that hormonal change in itself can be enough of a shock to the system. But I've also seen that with males who are doing everything right. Things are going well. They seem to be able to handle things. And then maybe they've had a child enter the relationship. They've had a child with their partner. And then that kind of like shakes things up. And it's really shaking the system up to say, what are my priorities now? What am I supposed to be doing? Like, I thought this was good. I thought I knew everything that we needed to have done. But either we bring another person into the mix with getting married, or another person into the mix with having children. Just something where essentially the roles of the system, even in RAMCOA, are now like, what do we do? How do we function? And then you'll get, kind of a lot of that switching component come about, and parts really just trying to find their footing and handle life as they know it. And that's where a lot of people will come in and sit in my office and be like, you will hear so often, I had everything. I was a successful banker. I, got married, and then, maybe it's a loss of a job to no fault of their own. Anything that brings in kind of that change in identity and roles really shakes up the system to where they're like, okay, I need help. And some systems, maybe if they, I can't say that they don't get affected if they have kids or like a job loss or something, but generally they're able to operate more covertly if they maybe not had situations like that come up. Or maybe they are and they've been diagnosed with bipolar or schizophrenia instead.
What role, in your opinion, does safety have in memories coming forward? Have you noticed at all in your own clients that something like a trigger or a memory recall could happen, maybe when an abuser dies, or if they're suddenly away from the cult, if they get married and move into a safe home? Have you noticed that being a part at all of some of that triggering?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just even learning the small connections and tracing things suddenly to learning how connected the whole organization is can be debilitating. That many of the things that they have done even in their adult life still traces back. Thinking like, hey, I'm away, I'm not experiencing that anymore, only to learn like that's another thing that can put a system off keel. Is I thought we were done with this. Like I grew up, nothing was happening anymore, only to learn so much more is definitely debilitating.
Have you noticed any patterning in the way the abuse is remembered? Whenever we talk about organized abuse, there's obviously a way that they are organizing the internal world in these parts. Do you notice that specific types of abuses come up first and then others are layered on it? Or can it be very random to where somebody might remember something really extreme and then later on remember something maybe not quite as extreme?
Lots of times I've noticed where in female born, it's not uncommon for the sexual abuse to come up first. And I think that's because it's so invasive. So you might be hearing sexual abuse memories, but they're not really connected. It comes kind of across like you might find with an organic D.I.D. Like, oh, it was one time type situation. Males, you get a lot more of there was aggression between male people in the life. Like, oh yeah, like I got in fistfights with, the parent, or like just it comes out like kind of these, though it's significant, you're like, oh, okay. And then you'll start to, because you have to garner trust, you'll start to get more and more of like, what is that connected to? As you get more trust within the system, you'll start to learn more and more of the heavy. Now, it's not uncommon for systems to come in and just dump. I've had at least one experience of that, but then it's kind of pulled back. Like, I didn't say anything. I don't know what you're talking about. But mostly you're going to get the little bits of trauma, and you're going to start building from there.
And probably too, if it's like, a one-time abuse, they might think it was just one perpetrator, which is still really devastating, but they might not know right at first that it was an organized network that they were intertwined in.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I just think about being on your end and like all of a sudden, you didn't have courses on this in school, and all of a sudden you have people coming in telling you just these horrific things. And it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? And especially when you're working locally in Michigan with people around your area often, and hearing these things happening right around you, it has to just be really devastating, and just so sad.
Yeah, I don't know what those that came before me even did, because they at least wrote some books.
Yeah.
Like they're like, I need to share this information, and for clinicians and that type of stuff. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have that first. I don't know what I'd do.
100%. And so for survivors who, maybe they didn't find a therapist yet, or maybe their system isn't quite comfortable enough opening up to somebody yet, whether it's a therapist or somebody else, what things have you recommended people newly waking up to being part of, a D.I.D system, or having grown up in a ritualistic, organized abuse family?
Yeah. Take it slow. Take it slow. It is a lot. Give yourself the grace that because a lot of times people will say, I don't know if I can believe the memory. Believe your body, because the body, it's not just psychological, it's physiological. If you're feeling like, especially around anniversaries, I just get really, this time of year just really seems to get me type of situation. Maybe, you're talking about headaches. Maybe things are just, body-wise are not going well. Or maybe you think that you have this memory, but you're not quite sure, but your body kind of recoils in certain situations. Like, give yourself that grace to believe yourself first. Is absolutely my first and foremost. And if you want, to keep record, do. I know those from can kind of go both ways when we talk about RAMCOA. I have some that have journals detailed, and some that are like, no way, Jose, that's not being written down. I don't want anybody to find it. You need to do what you feel is best for you first and foremost. But believe yourself first and foremost. If something doesn't feel right, chances are it's not.
And as far as memory and kind of remembering what you were programmed to forget, in a sense, in regards to how a client that has dissociative identity disorder will remember a memory from childhood versus somebody, let's just say like me, who didn't, when I look back at my childhood, even the hardest things, I just remember it in my head. It just kind of plays. It might elicit an emotion with it, but I can kind of just, go back on with my day, and it's not something that affects me. How does somebody remember? What does that look like when you say the body keeps the score? How does that look for somebody with D.I.D who has a flashback or remembers something that they forgot?
Yeah. So that's the tough part is systems do have a propensity to get into flashbacks. There's not only intrusive thoughts, but there's flashbacks where they actually feel like they're reliving the situation. Anything grounding, anything with it being very mindful of smells. If there's a smell that does not trigger you, maybe utilizing that, maybe utilizing ice to bring oneself forward from a flashback. Intrusive thoughts, we kind of need to think of, are we getting off the highway or are we staying on? And being very, very, very cognizant of actually talking to yourself. No, I'm not having these conversations in my head. This thought is not staying. Are kind of like keys between intrusive thoughts and being in a flashback. Because yeah, like us, we can, for the most part, like, oh, it's distressing, but it doesn't then take over the whole day.
Where for some survivors that of the abuses that we're talking about, when they're reliving it, it could literally be, an all day or a week event where they are just feeling what they went through in the moments of when that memory was occurring, and they can't just tuck it away and go on with their day. It's like an all consuming, almost like they entered into the scene again and they're back in their child body or teenage body whenever it happened. And they're physically experiencing the memory with all their senses. It's not just cognizant where they're like, oh, I can remember that almost like a daydream. It's like a full body experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's real. It's real and as a support person, I think you can attest to it. It's definitely something that's real and significant, and it's happening to the person.
Yes. And from a clinical perspective, one of the topics I've gotten really passionate about making sure to cover on the show as much as possible are these self-destruction, self-harm programs that can also go off unbeknownst many times to survivors that have dissociation. And it's so sad because a lot of times they'll act on those impulses that come up, not knowing what it was, and it's like as soon as they get free, their life is just taken from them, and so I try to do a lot of education on preventing that and educating that this could be a possibility and how to navigate it. And I'd love to get your feedback on that and your expertise on when you have clients going through those triggering systems that could possibly be harmful to them. How can a survivor navigate that in those moments?
Yeah. So it's very interesting. You have this myth like, oh, dissociative identity disorder. Oh, is it dangerous to me? And most times, no, it's not. Like generally, it's not. It's, if you're going to be destructive towards somebody else, that's a totally different thing that we're looking at. It's destructive internally. And that could be when we talk like parts could be harming the body because they don't want something to happen, or you have parts that are like, well, I need to punish us first so that way nobody, if I punish us first, then they're not going to leave, or they're not going to, as long as I take care of it type of situation. And you get the RAMCOA where that trigger is hit and they think that they kind of need to take care of business and like harm the body or put them in their place. It really is going external and seeking help. Like what trusted, which is really tough with RAMCOA, really tough. What external trusted sources do you have? Like whenever I talk about certain providers or places, I kind of talk about them as like placeholders more so. Like you're not going there to get great therapy. You're not going to the hospital to have everything fixed. You're just, how can we stop what's happening physically with the body? If you have a support person, having them sit with you and be with you is like going to be the biggest. You're going to lean on your supports. Being able to understand that parts do react, and they're generally not doing it to be mean or evil. It really is an attempt to either keep them safe, keep them behaving or doing what they need to do. And that's a whole nother thing to get into. But if you can lean on your supports, that's going to be your number one. Hey, I'm here to sit with you. What do you need to do? How can we keep you safe? What does it feel like internally? That type of situation.
Thank you for that. I think it's just, it's so sad that, even survivors are uneducated in those moments, and they're just left a lot of times by themselves, trying to cope with all these different things happening internally that, they're not even believed for a lot of times externally whenever they try to go get help or seek safety or tell somebody in their family or, a friend or something like that, or a church pastor or a therapist. And I can't even imagine trying to go through all of that by yourself, it's hard enough not having D.I.D and going through something really hard, like a loss of a family member or breakup, or, those things can just feel like it takes your breath away and like you're dysfunctional. I can't imagine trying to cope with, the types of things that they remember and are going through and how it's affecting their body. And, just blessings to you for for being a safe person for them, and for believing them and being there for them, and, being somebody that's in their corner when they're going through these moments. I'm sure you've saved a lot of lives doing what you're doing.
I hope so. Thank you.
Are there any things that you would not recommend for a survivor to do in a healing journey? Any methods of therapy or any interventions? Is there anything you've seen that can just be very destructive, in your opinion?
Done in the right setting I would kind of stay back from EMDR first and foremost. Like if you're just getting started in your journey, probably don't do EMDR. It's often quite it'll get you to switch a lot. EMDR is possible with systems. You just have to wait until you're kind of in the right phase of treatment. A lot of systems have shared with me how disorienting it was. And I've seen even clients that have come to me shortly before they've done EMDR, and they switch a lot between parts. It's a great tool. I'm trained in it as well. But you do have to be mindful, not scared. You just have to wait to the right phase of treatment to utilize it. And so survivors, I would say, don't seek that out first. Don't think it's going to be a quick fix. You want something that's going to aid in somatic work is great. And really listening to the body is going to be key as well. And any place the parts feel safe to be able to express themselves is going to be key.
Thank you for that. And as far as systems go, obviously a big part of understanding that somebody has a system is all the different firewalls being breached, all the parts becoming aware of each other, and just that chaos that ensues inside. For somebody maybe beginning that journey or struggling with connecting with parts, do you have any advice for especially new systems who are becoming aware of each other to get on the same page, become cohesive, and work together?
Yeah. People believing, I have people that I've worked with for years that are still like, I don't think that I have D.I.D. And that's whether it's RAMCOA or the organic. You're going to, first and foremost, you're going to fluctuate back and forth. That's very normal. Really pausing to be mindful. So just pause as much as you can. Notice where kind of the thoughts are coming from is really going to be key to starting to listen, starting to be able to have maybe internal meetings. What do we need? Kind of focusing in on that is going to be key, because that's even with RAMCOA. You may hear parts tell you we need to be compliant. We need to be, XYZ, because that's part of the structure of the system. And taking that in and being able to say, it's so cliche, but there's no bad parts. There's no bad parts. There really isn't. And we're just going to find, when I work with RAMCOA, we just find new jobs. We find new jobs for them. They're not unimportant, and they have, validity in the life as well. And we're just going to find them a new way to utilize their talents.
And what are your views on integration? Is that fully possible, or is it more of a memory integration where parts don't necessarily meld or become one with each other, but they become cohesive with what they know and the information that they have?
Yeah. So integration is something that it's been utilized to say, we take all these parts and they become one person. Integration really is just removing those dissociative barriers between parts. So if you think of, you've got a stick person and you've got these dissociative barriers and the other parts that go there, it's really just taking those dissociative barriers down. That's integration. And then from there, Parts may continue to operate as separate parts with communication between, or parts could fuse into other parts. And it's really tough to say exactly how that's going to happen for you, because it really, even with RAMCOA, it happens organically and what the system needs and what the system sees as best for everybody. And so it happens on case by case basis. But yeah, when we talk about integration, it's really just taking those dissociative barriers and removing them, and whether that being like memories are more cohesive between parts, or just parts being able to communicate with each other. That's kind of how we look at integration, but not the old-fashioned why would you want to live with parts type of integration.
100%. And I think that gets distorted too when we call this response mechanism a disorder, because disorders can be cured in a lot of people's minds when they hear that word, that somebody can cure themselves or heal from the disorder that's happening. I think people assume that this means that it just goes away when a survivor heals, where many times it's like you said, the barriers of the dissociated parts and of the dissociated memories go away, and the survivor can then have full integration of their mind together, parts working together instead of separately, and the system can be aware of each other and the information that each part holds versus having these different segments in their mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what advice would you give as well to supporters, allies, therapists, friends, spouses of people who are recognizing that their systems and have parts that want to share memories or might come out and share randomly, and the other person's on the receiving end of that and doesn't really know how to maybe cope with it? What are some ways that we can be supportive to survivors in a way that they feel safe and embraced versus maybe, unintentionally harming that person again through our actions or words?
Yeah. I definitely am hoping, as I work with significant others of systems, to take care of yourself first and foremost, so that way you have an outlet and you have your support for when you do have those times where things are going to be shared with you that are really significant, that are really deep. So that way you can then lean on your supports to kind of process through that. Because if you don't have your own supports, and this is for any sort of caregiving, any sort of like friendship, any sort of being a spouse, with any type of, physical or mental health, you have to be able to utilize your own supports first and foremost. Otherwise, you're going to burn out. It's going to be too much. Your mind is going to be like, I'm getting secondary trauma. Like, I can't deal with this. I can't do this. Take a breath. It is possible. You do have to lean on, are you going to therapy? Are you journaling? Are you doing extra physical activity because you've made that decision that I am in this for the long haul with my friend, with my partner, or maybe even, I would say parents, I'm always very cautious of like how much kids give to parents who are in these situations. But even in that situation, take care of yourself first. That is going to be key.
And for survivors, for you being a therapist, do you have any guidance on maybe questions that survivors can ask a therapist to see if it's a good fit, or ways that they can troubleshoot getting help instead of being burned out and burned out and burned out by continuing to maybe see unsafe people without knowing? Do you know of any shortcuts that maybe a survivor could use?
It's definitely going to be key to how much do they know or work with. Are they thinking first and foremost that they have D.I.D? Oh, if that's a thing that they're figuring, yeah, I think I have D.I.D. what continuing training and education is that therapist getting? You have every right to ask that. I have clients that ask me, like, do I do therapy? like they kind of are even upfront and asking me that. I'm like, do you have your own therapist? Like, because what I'm going to bring to the table is pretty heavy. Ask that. If you can't ask questions, be prepared. Some questions won't be answered. But if you can't ask questions, that's a red flag to me. Because we should, as therapists, be able to say, yeah, I used to do therapy. I don't do it now, but I have mechanisms in place to be able to protect and take care of myself. That would be the first. If you can't ask questions of the person, I would question that myself.
Should a survivor ask about RAMCOA or dissociative identity disorder to their therapist to get maybe see if they know about it? Or do you think that they shouldn't do that initially?
I think that they should, for me, I absolutely believe, hey, are you familiar with major depressive? Are you familiar with RAMCOA? Are you familiar with D.I.D? What do you know of it? Because you may have, quite often what ends up happening is people will work with a clinician for a while and then this comes up. And some clinicians are really great and understand that the therapeutic relationship is key, and they'll get that education and they'll get that information. So yeah, you should be empowered to ask, do you know about this? Is this something you're familiar with? And I'm hoping a clinician will be honest enough to say, I don't. I'm not familiar with it. Okay. I'm hoping referrals of people connecting with other clinicians now are becoming a greater resource to where they can say, I don't, but I know somebody who can, is what I'm hoping ends up happening.
Me too. And I do see it happening little bit by little bit behind the scenes. I do know of private therapist groups where groups of therapists are now meeting and exchanging ideas, things that help them. They're sharing about maybe hard client cases and things that they can do. And so it's really wonderful that there is that networking. You do see more therapists today than ever, and people helping survivors that are genuinely willing to take this on at all costs, even at the expense of themselves, and one of the things that I really admire about what you're doing and what I'd like to talk about next is you have gone public. You're actually out there on social media. You have an amazing TikTok, like I said. Your website's obviously a wealth of knowledge, but I wanted to ask, why did you want to go forward with being public and sharing about what you're learning in your journey, knowing that there's risk involved, knowing that there could be potential bullying or people that don't believe what you're saying or discrediting? I'd love to talk about that journey because I'm just so impressed with you. So many in your field are more operating behind the scenes, which is still fine. And even more won't even take this on at all, much less want to be sort of a public figure with it. So I want to talk about that journey a little bit and share your TikTok with people.
Yeah. I love this community. I love my job. But this community, I don't have enough words of love for this community and what they've been through. That is why, despite any risks, I'm also stubborn. So that there's kind of that in there, that I will not be silenced or frightened away because I love this community. I don't know what it is about their hearts, exactly what it is or what it is that got me so deeply. But yeah, I want to share the information in little bites as much as I can in the day to day and really give encouragement that you're okay to speak up. It's going to be okay. And we're going to work through this and figure this out together. But yeah, so the love of the community and my stubbornness is really, that's where it's at.
And why did you pick TikTok as the platform to use your voice?
It's interesting because I was for the longest time like, I'm not going to touch TikTok and it's going to be a curmudgeon in regards to it. I've noticed I really liked the idea of kind of having digestible content, and I knew that I could get it at TikTok. There are some other platforms that I'm looking into getting into that I can have some of that digestible content. But I've noticed that there's just a calling for it as I started it. So the intention was short form content that was digestible, and then it just kind of started to grow more and more from there. So that's why I chose. I got on TikTok. I did it. I made the move. and I love it, and now I'm addicted. So
that's been one of my favorite platforms. Unfortunately, a lot of the videos, I have a lot of strikes on my account, so I haven't been using it, and I've lost a few accounts talking about this stuff, so I'm still navigating how to talk about it on this platform.
Same.
But man, there is a wonderful community on there. I was not, when I first logged on to TikTok for my first time, it was all like people dancing and like people eating food. And I was like, gosh, how's my content even going to fit in here? Like, I don't even know what I'm doing on here. But the more that I posted, I started getting more, just like how you popped up in my feed. There is a lot of survivors on TikTok and a wonderful community that's willing to talk about this, whether it is systems talking about it or people that are posting videos of, interviews of people or, different professionals that are sort of skirting the line of this and talking about a little bit. Have you noticed that too, that there's just like a really cool community on here?
I did. And I did notice that I am going to have to be a little like sneaky when it comes to talking about RAMCOA.
Yes.
But I'm not going to stop. So I'm just going to have to figure that out because I'm going to keep posting about it. So
yes, girl.
It's going to keep happening. I'm going to figure it out.
And this is under your business name, the handle, not although you can type in your name, Sara Rice, and it comes up, but the handle is actually your treatment center.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
And so I'm going to have that in the show notes for everybody. And for people who are listening, that's koinonia. It's quite a word to say, but that's Koinonia Counseling Center is the handle if you're listening and not watching. But regardless of what platform you're on, I'm going to have Sara's TikTok down in the show notes. That way you guys can go support her. Her videos really were like, they caught me right away. I learned so much just in 1 minute on so many of her videos. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so helpful. I love how she's breaking this down professionally, clinically, in a very validating and empowering way. And she does it in such a supportive way, talking to systems and survivors in a way that makes them feel seen and heard, as well as helping people like me and other therapists that may be watching her page feel empowered with information that we're getting to learn about what maybe people that we love or a cause that we're really passionate about or this community that we really want to help is going through, when it can be just so inconceivable. And that's always been my problem with some of these short videos, is they turn into a sort of conspiratorial version of these stories where people try to pack in really hard to understand things in 1 minute that might make total sense to somebody who is understanding of what this community has gone through and who knows about this. But for people who are not familiar with it, they might look at it and it becomes something entertaining to them and something that to them almost is like a movie preview or something, instead of an actual real person's life, something that all of our bodies are capable of, and something that is severely misunderstood in a lot of communities. I think that Sara just does an incredible job breaking this down in a way that is digestible, palatable, validating, and empowering all at the same time. And some of it is, she puts a lot of like humor to it, and it's very like lighthearted too, which I love because this can be a very heavy and hard topic. And you've somehow found a way to make it almost like you're sitting in a class in a way and getting like these little mini lessons. It's something where you feel like you could almost take notes about, instead of being like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. Like, I don't know how I'm going to function the rest of the day. This is a horrible thing that I just learned. Instead, it's like, oh, that makes total sense. And how amazing that I'm capable of this, or that that somebody else is going through this that maybe I know, and now I can help support. So I just like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And I hope that you go on other platforms, because I really think that this community everywhere could benefit from the way that you're breaking this down, and in the sort of tonality and voice that you've chosen to do it with.
Thank you. Yeah. And I am more than willing, even if somebody doesn't agree. I have gotten after those that say D.I.D isn't real. I ain't gonna lie, I'm gonna come after you for that. But
Yes.
But if those in the community, even with their lived experience, if they even question me as anything, like, I will have a conversation with you. I am not, like you've talked about, I am not above learning and being educated ever.
And I think this is a good way too. If you're a listener, or you're an advocate, if you're a therapist and you have a question for Sara, and maybe don't have a lot of time to, reach out and have a really long conversation with her, and maybe she doesn't have time for that, her videos are a really great way where you guys can leave a comment or ask her a question, and she can create a video and answer that for you, and be able to help you with whatever it is that you're confused about or want to know more about. Or even if you guys just want to give her encouragement. A lot of times these topics are not elevated in the algorithm. So even if you don't have questions, if you guys are on TikTok, if you could go support her, that would mean the world, just because every comment, every like, every share, it helps more eyes see this content. And we need more, professionals and people that can sort of talk about this in a very validating way, and that have these different credentials that, people will listen to. So I would really love if you guys would just go on Sara's TikTok, if you're on there, and even if you don't have questions, just go support, show her love, lift her videos up, write her nice comments, share it, go post her account on your social media, download her videos and share them, send her account to a survivor, or another advocate that or a therapist. Her account's also really great if you're a survivor that is getting therapy and maybe you're educating your therapist. I think Sara's account's a really good account to send to counselors and therapists, because she does talk about a lot on here that can be really helpful. And Sara, I know that you're not taking clients, but I still wanted to, and that's amazing that you're so booked. I really hope that more therapists step up, because there's so many that are helping that are just too booked to keep taking on clients. But your website is also a wealth of knowledge. I wanted to share that as well, and just, talk about your business a little bit.
Yeah. So it's myself and my colleague. Like I said, she's the stinker that got me into this and made me fall in love with it. So it's just the two of us. We have dissociative resources. She does consultation. I do consultation. So anything to support this community. Very complex trauma is definitely our the way that we go, and then very heavy into dissociative identities and making sure that they get the adequate and appropriate treatment.
And there's a wonderful resource page on here. There's a blog. I was looking at this earlier. I was really amazed you even have articles that have some really interesting topics that you guys have been posting, which is really neat. And they're really important topics that are on here. So even if you're not seeking therapy necessarily, even if it's not, somewhere where you're going to look for professional help, her website has a lot of resources if you want to learn more. And it also has resources on it from her and her team that have provided these really comprehensive articles on some really helpful things for both survivors and those around them to help navigate DID, trauma, boundaries, all kinds of different topics on here that you guys can go learn about. So I really encourage you guys to do that. And if you are just absolutely in love with Sara and she's somebody that you really do want to work with, you can go on here and request to be on the wait list. So if maybe a client drops, or if somebody gets to a point where they maybe don't need therapy, you can be on that wait list and, seek help in the meantime in ways that are conducive to you and your own healing. And Sara, is there anything else that you wanted to share today that we didn't get to?
No, I mean, I think you and I could probably keep talking for hours upon hours, but no, not at this moment.
I think we did a great job breaking down sort of a lot of the basics of it. And of course, your work is really important that you're doing. And I really appreciate you. I'm excited to have you back on to dive in maybe some more specific topics. So if people listening, if you guys want to know about specific topics regarding DID, regarding part systems, support, therapy, please leave them in the comments and we can do some Q&A next time Sara comes on and use some of those topics and questions as a means of our discussion. But Sara, thank you for coming on today and for sharing all of this with us. I honor you and your work. I'm just, like I said, I'm thrilled that you're out there doing what you're doing, and it gives me hope to see somebody like you out there risking so much to, be public, to help people, to fill your schedule up with this really difficult, heavy type of client. You have a really big heart, and we're all really lucky in this community to have you.
Thank you. I'm lucky to be in this community. Very lucky.
We have a lot to learn from you, and I'm excited to have you on again. And so for everybody listening, go in the show notes and connect with us. Go follow Sara on TikTok, visit her website, share all of her resources, her blog, her page, and of course her TikTok. Go support her and interact with her on there. I'll have all my things and my contacts in the show notes as well, you guys. We couldn't do this without you. You guys are the backbone to all of this. Otherwise we'd just be shouting into an empty abyss. So thank you guys on the other side of the screen for all you do to support us in this community. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you guys for listening. Bless you all, and we will see you next time.